Welcome back, everyone, to another Bleak Rides True Crime episode. We'll call this episode 2 of the series. We've got a great story picked out for today. Always link in the description below to the original source material. If this is your first time checking out a Bleak Rides True Crime, thank you for coming along on the journey. I do motorcycle content and true crime stories, to the best of my ability anyway. But without further ado, let's get into it. Today's story: the murder of Michelle Martinko. Michelle Marie Martinko was born December 19th, 1979 in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Michelle was the younger of two daughters of Albert F. Martinko and Janet Martinko. She attended Cedar Rapids Kennedy High School, where she was an above-average student and well regarded by school officials and her classmates. She was also a talented performer, joined the twirling squad as a sophomore, and performed in choir and theater productions. She did not have many close girlfriends or confidants, which was speculated to be caused by jealousy from the other students over her beauty and stylish clothes, or maybe a conflict from a boy she had dated. Martinko, who was a senior in the high school when she was killed, had plans to attend Iowa State University to study interior design. On a cold and dark evening in December 19th of 1979, Michelle attended a banquet for the Kennedy Concert Choir at the Sheridan Inn in Cedar Rapids. She wore a black jersey dress and a black scarf, black tights and heels, and a waist-length white and brown rabbit fur jacket. And she'd carried a brown leather purse. After the event, she asked her friend, the twirling squad teammate, if she wanted to join her on a shopping trip to the Westdale Mall, which had recently opened, and where Martinko worked. Her friend declined. Martinko then asked another acquaintance to go to the mall with her. The friend said yes at first, but later changed her mind. Michelle then went to the mall alone, carrying $180 and intending to finalize the purchase of a new winter coat that was on layaway. Once there, she perused the stores and spoke with a couple other friends she knew who worked at the mall. She was last seen at almost 9 p.m. outside of the jewelry store in the mall. At 2 a.m., since Michelle had still not returned home, her father reported her missing. He began to search for her, as did the police. At 4 a.m., police found Michelle Martinko's family's tan and green 1970 Buick Electra in the northeast corner of the mall parking lot. Michelle was found inside, collapsed over the passenger seat, stabbed to death. Michelle Martinko had been stabbed 29 times in her face, neck, and chest. Her hands showed signs of defensive wounds, which police said to indicate that she had fought back against her killer. Police determined from the lack of blood outside the car that she had been killed while in the car, and the medical examiner later estimated she had died between 8 and 10 p.m. The murder weapon was a sharp-pointed, but not definitively a knife, and the medical examiner could not determine its size. The killer left no fingerprints, which led police to believe they had worn gloves. A police spokesman said that everyone's instinct is to say it was a guy, but they were not sure of the sex of the killer. Based on the cash found in Michelle's purse, police concluded that she had not been robbed. She was fully dressed, and the medical examiner determined she had not been sexually assaulted. Police considered the killing to be personal in nature, based on the number and location of the stab wounds. The initial investigation police had very few leads, so they appealed to the public for tips. A police spokesman estimated that in the week after her murder, more than 200 people responded to the detectives' appeals for new information concerning the case. Police interviewed numerous people, and several were cleared of suspicions through the use of a polygraph. A juvenile found carrying a knife was interviewed and ruled out as the murderer. I mean, they turned the whole town upside down. Every rock. No rock was left unturned. Of course, the rumor mill got going. Rumors began to circulate about the crime. Some thought that Michelle had received harassing phone calls before her death, but police stated that they did not think so. Another rumor emerged that a second stabbing had happened in the following days, and that police were keeping it a secret, which police denied. For a little while, they had a prime suspect. A man had broken into a Cedar Rapids home a few months before, raped a woman at knife point, and threatened to murder her children if she ever talked. That man was later cleared of any wrongdoing, at least in this case, by DNA, and ultimately would die in prison of colon cancer. My research shows colon cancer to be incredibly painful, although I don't know any pain is great enough for a rapist. Things just grew colder and colder. Leads dried up completely. On June 19th, 1980, police released a composite sketch of a man believed to have killed Michelle, which they formed from a description provided by two witnesses under hypnosis. They described a white man in his late teens or early 20s, around 6 feet tall, weighing $160, $175 at most, with brown eyes and curly brown hair. In the years after the killing, a number of people interviewed by police reached the hundreds, and up to 30 people were interviewed under hypnosis. As the investigations dwindled, a $10,000 reward was offered, big money back then, for information that would lead police to the killer. Psychics were also consulted early on in the investigation. The case grew very cold. In the middle of the 1980s, Michelle's father filed a lawsuit against the owners of the Westdale Mall and claimed negligence for not providing reasonable security on the night of the murder. The case was appealed and eventually decided by the Iowa Supreme Court in favor of the mall owners. Michelle's father, Albert, died in 1995. Her mother, Janet, died in 1998. Very sad. In 2006, some 27 years later, or after Michelle's murder, Cedar Rapids Police Department received a tip connected to the case, and the cold case was reopened. And some new DNA technology had come along, and some new things were on the horizon. Ultimately, nothing much would happen for many more years. In 2018, the DNA phenotyping company took the data they had collected years previously and entered it into a DNA matching system of public genealogy, a website that had been used by law enforcement to solve other cold cases, most famously that one of the Golden State Killer. One match was returned, with a DNA marker matching Michelle Martinico. The murderer was determined to likely be her second cousin once removed. The company created a family tree starting with 4 sets of the women's greatest grandparents, and reported that the killer was most likely descendant from one of those couples. An investigator with Cedar Rapids Police Department contacted the DNA test members of the 2 branches of the family tree and eliminated those branches as containing the killer. He then contacted a member of the 3rd branch, and the DNA test determined that they were first cousins with this killer. This helped narrow the suspects down to a set of 3 brothers who had grown up in Manchester, Iowa. The brothers were placed under surveillance, and investigators began to attempt to collect their DNA secretly. On a fateful day, October 29th, 2018, an investigator observed one of the brothers, Jerry Lynn Burns, drink multiple sodas using a plastic straw. When Burns disposed of the straw, the investigators collected it and tested it for DNA. Tests eliminated the other 2 brothers and as suspects or potential links. But DNA from Burns' straw matched the blood found on Martinico's clothing. On December 19th, 2018, investigators went to Burns' business in Manchester, Iowa to interview him. He refused to voluntarily provide a DNA sample, but was compelled to do so with a search warrant. His hands and arms were also examined for scars possibly left by the assumed cuts sustained during the attacks. Burns maintained that he did not know Michelle and was not there when she died. although an investigator later testified that Burns did not specify or deny killing her. He was not able to provide an explanation for why his DNA would have been present at the crime scene. According to investigators, Burns showed almost no emotion during the interview, even when he was eventually told he was being arrested. When asked if he had killed someone that night in 1979, and so here we are, on December 19th, 2018, exactly 39 years after Michelle's murder, Burns was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. He entered a plea of not guilty. His trial was originally scheduled for October 2019, but got delayed. In September, the defense requested a delay in the order to gather more evidence. The defense also requested the trial be moved out of Lynn County based on the amount of attention the case was getting. In pretrial hearings, Burns' attorney claimed that police needed a search warrant to gather his DNA from the discarded straw, but the judge determined that discarded property cannot be reasonably considered private. Burns' cell phone and browser history were suppressed. Investigators had reviewed Burns' 2018 internet searches and found that he regularly visited websites showing blonde women being raped, stabbed, and strangled, and in which depicted sexual intercourse with murder victims. The judge determined the search history was not usable in the trial due to the decades of time separating the murders and the searches. After 2 days of jury selection, the murder trial began, February 12, 2020. The prosecution emphasized the unlikelihood of the DNA evidence matching someone other than the person who left it in the scene. The defense was paper thin, and on February 24, 2020, after 3 hours of deliberation, the jury found Jerry Lynn Burns guilty of first-degree murder of Michelle Martinico. Iowa law mandates a life sentence without the possibility of parole for first-degree murder. On May 29, 2020, Burns' attorney filed a motion asking for a new trial, claiming his constitutional and state rights were violated and that the court made a mistake in overruling the request for evidence to be suppressed. On August 7, 2020, Burns was sentenced to life in prison without parole. In September 2020, Burns filed an appeal. Burns is currently imprisoned in Anamosa State Penitentiary. Wow. That poor lady was murdered by a cousin she barely knew, didn't know at all. And it took 39 years for them to solve her murder. Her parents never got to feel the slight warmth of knowing what happened to their daughter that fateful night. This was a cold case for the ages. And one right in my own backyard as an Iowan. Wow. Hey, I want to thank you all for coming along on this cold case reading. I'll link the story in the description box below. I hope you all be safe out there, whether you're going to the mall, going to the jewelry store, or just going to see a movie. In your day-to-day, don't be afraid to look over your shoulder. Don't be afraid to move a little quicker to your car. Maybe we could all benefit from locking our doors. And with that, I want to thank you all for coming along on another Bleak Rides. Forever Two Wheels.